Hello friends, welcome aboard the Sleepy Fairy Tale Express. I'm the Red Mermaid. This train is a dream journey to fairy tale land. Have you all got your train tickets? Subscribe and hit the like button to always be able to ride. Close your eyes, prick up your ears, and listen in a comfortable position. Today's story is The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy lived on a small farm in Kansas with her grandfather and grandmother. The farm was in the middle of a vast prairie, with endless fields and occasional trees dominating the landscape. The house was old but cozy, a humble two-story structure made of gray bricks. The walls bore the marks of time, with occasional tufts of grass growing between the bricks. Surrounding the house was a small garden, lovingly tended by her grandmother, filled with vegetables and flowers. Next to the garden was a small barn, inside of which lay Toto's favorite old blanket, Dorothy's small black dog. One day, the sky suddenly began to darken. At first, a few drops of rain fell, then came the roar of thunder and the appearance of a massive tornado. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and the wind started to blow fiercely. The trees swayed violently, and the fields of wheat rippled like waves. The distant sound of the approaching tornado grew louder and more intense. The wind grew stronger, and the air tingled with electricity. Dorothy sensed the danger and hurriedly began to look for Toto. "Toto, let's go home!" Dorothy shouted with a worried voice. Toto was crouched in the corner of the old barn, and Dorothy quickly grabbed him and ran toward the house. With a frightened and anxious heart, she hoped to reach safety before the tornado struck the house. The tornado drew closer and closer. The wind grew even fiercer, and the trees shook madly, with branches snapping and flying away. The sky turned pitch black, and the thunder roared deafeningly. The massive tornado on the horizon loomed closer like a roaring beast ready to swallow everything. The wind hit the house, causing the walls to creak and the windows to rattle as if they would shatter. Dorothy held Toto tightly, trembling with fear. "Toto, we'll be okay," she reassured both herself and Toto. Just then, with a loud whooshing sound, the house was lifted off the ground. Dorothy felt herself rising and screamed. Everything inside the house was thrown into the air, and Dorothy clung to Toto, trying not to let go. The house spun around like a giant balloon, ascending into the tornado. Pictures fell off the walls, and furniture was tossed around. The wind held through the gaps in the windows, making a sharp whistling noise. Dorothy tried to calm her racing heart, hugging Toto tightly. "Oh no, we're going up into the sky," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of fear and curiosity. Toto barked nervously, looking around with wide eyes from Dorothy's arms. The house continued to fly through the tornado until it finally landed with a thud. Dorothy took a moment to catch her breath before opening the door to look outside. The sight that greeted her was breathtaking. The sky was clear and blue, with clouds as soft and white as cotton candy. Surrounding her were fields of vibrant, colorful flowers, their petals swaying gently in the breeze and filling the air with a sweet fragrance. It was a stark contrast to the barren plains of Kansas. Before Dorothy lay a new world that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Tall trees with branches laden with various fruits stood around her. Birds chirped melodiously as they flitted from tree to tree, their songs like beautiful melodies. The ground was covered in soft grass, and small animals darted about playfully. Toto jumped down from Dorothy's arms and began to explore the new surroundings excitedly. "Wow, where am I?" Dorothy exclaimed in awe. She noticed a golden path at her feet, sparkling and stretching far into the distance. It seemed to lead to the heart of this magical world. After a moment of hesitation, Dorothy gathered her courage and, taking Toto with her, started to follow the golden path. Dorothy began to walk along the golden path. It curved gently and extended far into the distance, bordered by endless fields of beautiful flowers. The flowers bloomed in a myriad of colors: red, yellow, blue, purple, and their gentle fragrance tickled Dorothy's nose. Her footsteps echoed softly on the path, and the gold beneath her shoes sparkled with every step. Toto darted around, exploring the new environment with boundless energy. Dorothy was completely captivated by the enchanting world around her. The trees towered above, their branches heavy with an array of fruits. Some of these fruits were ones Dorothy had never seen before: golden apples, silver pears, and rainbow-colored strawberries. Birds flew between the trees, their songs creating a heavenly symphony. "Toto, we must find the wizard. He will surely help us return home," Dorothy said. Her voice was filled with confidence, though she felt a mixture of excitement and fear inside. As Dorothy walked along the golden path, she noticed a scarecrow standing by the roadside. The scarecrow was mounted on a cross-shaped frame made of wooden sticks, wearing old, tattered clothes. His face was made of a faded piece of cloth with eyes, a nose, and a mouth drawn on it, and there was a permanent smile etched on his face. The eyes were made of black buttons, and the nose was a roughly sewn piece of red fabric. His body was stuffed with straw that fluttered in the wind, and his arms were stretched out to the sides, with worn-out gloves on his hands. As the wind blew, the scarecrow seemed to wave at Dorothy, as if greeting her. Around him, the green grass and various wildflowers were in full bloom. The sunlight shone warmly, and a gentle breeze blew, softly rustling the scarecrow and the flowers. Dorothy looked at the scarecrow with curious eyes. Toto wagged his tail and approached the scarecrow, sniffing around its base. "Hello? What are you doing here?" Dorothy asked. Her voice was gentle but carried a hint of caution. The scarecrow swayed more noticeably, as if responding to her question. Gathering her courage, Dorothy took a step closer to the scarecrow. "I am seeking wisdom." "Where are you going?" the scarecrow replied. His voice was surprisingly warm and friendly. Dorothy was initially taken aback, but soon smiled and continued the conversation. "I'm going to meet the Wizard of Oz. Would you like to come with me?" Dorothy suggested. The smile on the scarecrow's painted face seemed to brighten. "Oh, really? I would love to go," the scarecrow said joyfully. Dorothy helped the scarecrow down from his wooden frame, and he stumbled slightly as he took his first steps. With Dorothy and Toto leading the way, the scarecrow joined them, and they began to walk along the golden path together. Dorothy and the scarecrow continued along the golden path. The scarecrow, still unsteady on his feet, stumbled a bit but gradually found his balance. His straw-filled body creaked with each step, and Dorothy supported him by holding his arm. Toto happily ran around them, barking joyfully. The path wound gently through the lush forest. Dorothy and the scarecrow admired the colorful flowers blooming on either side of the path. The flowers swayed in the breeze, releasing a pleasant fragrance that calmed their hearts. The scarecrow looked around with wonder, experiencing everything for the first time. "I am seeking wisdom." "Where are you going?" the scarecrow asked Dorothy, his voice warm and gentle. "I'm going to meet the Wizard of Oz. Would you like to come with me?" Dorothy replied, giving the scarecrow a friendly smile. The scarecrow thought for a moment, then nodded. "Oh, really? I would love to go," the scarecrow said happily. Dorothy held his hand more firmly, and they walked with renewed determination. Though the scarecrow's steps were still clumsy, he gradually grew steadier with Dorothy's help. As they walked, they shared their stories. The scarecrow explained that he was made to guard a field but had always longed for a brain to think and learn. Dorothy listened attentively, comforting him. "The wizard will surely help you," she said confidently. Dorothy and the scarecrow continued along the golden path. The scarecrow's steps were still awkward, but he was getting more used to walking. His straw-filled body made soft creaking sounds with each step. The surrounding trees were lush and green, and sunlight filtered through the leaves, making the golden path sparkle even more. Toto ran around excitedly, circling Dorothy and the scarecrow. "Why do you seek wisdom?" Dorothy asked curiously, wanting to understand the scarecrow's desire. The scarecrow looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "I was made to guard a field. But just scaring away birds isn't enough. I've heard that having a brain to think is what really matters. With a brain, I could do so much more and learn so many things, he explained. Dorothy nodded in understanding. Yes, having a brain would help you solve many problems. The wizard will definitely help you, she reassured him, patting his shoulder. They continued walking, admiring the beauty around them. The fields visible through the trees were full of vibrant flowers, and their scent filled the air. Birds sang sweetly from the branches, and Dorothy and the Scarecrow listened to their songs as they walked. The Scarecrow continued explaining his desire for wisdom. His voice was serious, and his gaze distant. I am just a scarecrow, standing in a field to scare away birds. But I want more than that. I want to think and learn. I've heard that having a brain is the most important thing. With a brain, I could do so much more, and the farmer would value me more. I could be a better scarecrow, he said slowly. Dorothy felt a deep empathy for the Scarecrow's words and nodded. The wizard will surely help you, she said confidently. We'll ask him to grant your wish when we meet him. They continued walking, sharing their stories. The Scarecrow talked about his experiences, standing in the field day after day, feeling the desire to think and learn, but being unable to because of his straw-filled body. Dorothy listened attentively, offering comfort and encouragement. The wizard will help you, she said kindly. You will surely gain great wisdom. As they walked along the path, Dorothy and the Scarecrow noticed something shiny in the woods beside the road. Upon closer inspection, they discovered a Tin Woodman. He was entirely made of gleaming tin, reflecting the sunlight brilliantly. The Tin Woodman was trying to move, but seemed completely rusted in place. Dorothy and the Scarecrow were amazed by his condition. The Tin Woodman managed to make a faint creaking sound as he attempted to move. Dorothy approached him and saw that he was covered in rust. She found an oil can nearby and began to oil his joints. Slowly, the Tin Woodman began to move more freely until he could move all his limbs again. Thank you, the Tin Woodman said, his metallic voice warm with gratitude. I've been standing here for a long time, hoping someone would come to help me. Dorothy smiled. You're welcome. But why were you standing here? The Tin Woodman sighed deeply. I need a heart. Because my body is made of tin, I can't feel any emotions. I was on my way to see the Wizard of Oz, but I got stuck here. The Scarecrow, feeling a deep empathy, spoke up. We are also on our way to see the wizard. I seek wisdom, and Dorothy wants to return home. You should come with us. The wizard can help you too. The Tin Woodman gratefully accepted their offer. Thank you so much. I would love to join you. Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Woodman continued walking along the golden path. The Tin Woodman's movements were still a bit stiff, but with Dorothy and the Scarecrow's help, he began to move more naturally. His joints, now well-oiled, glinted in the sunlight, and his steps grew more confident. Each step the Tin Woodman took made a soft creaking sound, almost like a rhythm to a song. Dorothy and the Scarecrow matched their steps to the sound, creating a harmonious cadence. The Tin Woodman shared his story as they walked, his voice metallic but warm and earnest. "I was once a woodcutter," the Tin Woodman began. "I worked in the forest, cutting trees and building houses. But a wicked witch cursed me, turning my body into tin. At first, I could still work, but over time, my body rusted, and one day I became completely immobile." Dorothy listened with deep sympathy. "That's so sad. But now that you're with us, we'll all go see the wizard, and he'll help us." The Scarecrow nodded. "Yes, the wizard will grant our wishes. I'll get wisdom, and you'll get a heart." They encouraged each other as they walked. The path became more beautiful, and the surrounding scenery looked like something out of a fairy tale. The trees grew taller, their leaves shining green. The flowers bloomed in even more vibrant colors, filling the air with their delightful fragrance. Birds sang more beautifully, and Toto wagged his tail to their songs, happily running around. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the trees grew denser, and the forest sounds grew louder, creating an enchanting atmosphere. Toto continued to run joyfully, but Dorothy remained cautious, watching her surroundings carefully. Suddenly, a large shadow emerged from the trees. It moved closer and revealed itself to be a lion. The lion stood before Dorothy and her friends, opening its massive jaws and letting out a powerful roar. His mane blew in the wind, making him look fierce, but his eyes showed a hint of fear. Dorothy, initially frightened, gathered her courage and approached the lion. "Hello? Why are you trying to scare us?" she asked gently. The lion stepped back with a startled expression. "I am a cowardly lion," he said, ashamed. "If I don't scare other animals, I am too scared to bear it myself. The truth is, I need courage, but without it, I just go around frightening others." The Tin Man felt deep compassion after hearing the lion's words. "We are also on our way to see the Wizard of Oz to fulfill our wishes. I am looking for a heart, and the Scarecrow wants wisdom. Would you like to join us?" The lion thought for a moment and then nodded. "Would you really take me with you? I really need courage." Dorothy smiled and took the lion's paw. "Of course. Together, we can do anything." Dorothy and her friends continued walking along the yellow brick road with their new companion, the Cowardly Lion. The lion, still unable to shake off his fear, looked around nervously with each step he took. Nevertheless, having his friends by his side helped him muster the courage to keep moving. "Don't worry, the wizard will give you courage when we get there," Dorothy reassured the lion. Her voice was gentle but filled with confidence. The lion seemed slightly reassured and nodded. The Tin Man moved with a creaking sound every time he spoke. "We are all on a journey to fulfill our wishes. If we help each other, we can surely succeed." The Scarecrow also encouraged the lion. "I'm looking for wisdom too. If we work together, we can achieve all our goals." As they followed the road, they faced various challenges. The forest grew darker, and the trees swayed eerily as if they were alive. Dorothy carefully followed the yellow brick road to avoid getting lost. Toto stayed alert, running around and ensuring the group's safety. They continued their adventure along the yellow brick road toward the Emerald City. The path became increasingly rugged, and the surrounding scenery grew more bizarre and mystical. The forest became denser, the trees taller, and the leaves dark and glossy green. Between the leaves, colorful birds flitted, singing their own songs. The sound was sometimes beautiful, sometimes eerie. Along the way, they encountered various difficulties. Large rocks appeared on the path, and at times, the road abruptly ended, forcing them to find an alternate route. Dorothy faced these obstacles bravely, taking the lead. "We can do anything if we stick together," she declared with determination, and her friends nodded in agreement, gaining strength from her words. As they continued, they encountered a deep, wide river. The water was clear and blue, but the current was very swift. Dorothy paused by the riverbank, contemplating how to cross. The Scarecrow pointed to a large tree on the other side. "We could use that tree to build a bridge," he suggested. The Tin Man agreed with the idea and, together with Dorothy and the lion, began moving the tree. The lion used all his strength to lift the tree, and the Tin Man, with his strong arms, positioned it correctly. Once the bridge was completed, Dorothy cautiously began to cross it. Toto followed her, and the Scarecrow and Tin Man carefully crossed behind them. The lion waited until he was sure the bridge was sturdy before crossing last. When they all made it safely across, they smiled at each other in relief. As they drew closer to the Emerald City, the scenery became even more beautiful. Flower fields became more vibrant, and the trees grew higher toward the sky. The birds sang even more beautifully, and the air was fresh and clean. Dorothy was filled with awe at the sight. "This must be the way to the Emerald City," she said. The Tin Man admired the view. "This city is truly dazzling," he said, smiling brightly. The Scarecrow shouted joyfully, "We're almost there." Dorothy and her friends' journey to the Emerald City was not just a physical one. It was a crucial time for them to learn the power of friendship and discover each other's value. Their bond deepened as they faced numerous obstacles and challenges on the road. When they traversed the deep, dark forest, they relied on each other. Dorothy encouraged the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion not to lose courage and took the lead. Despite being naturally timid, the Lion stayed vigilant to protect Dorothy and his friends. The Tin Man used his strong body to clear branches blocking their path, and the Scarecrow climbed tall trees to find the way. They helped each other and carved a path through the woods. One day, they had to pass through a magical forest inhabited by fantastic creatures, with a mysterious fog that could make travelers lose their way. Dorothy held her friends' hands to prevent them from getting lost. The Lion led the way, and the Tin Man protected them from behind. The Scarecrow climbed a tree to look beyond the fog. They realized how important each other's presence was. When they safely passed through the magical forest, Dorothy thanked her friends. "We got here safely because we were together. Thank you so much, everyone." She spoke with a heartfelt smile. The Scarecrow agreed, saying, "Yes, we can overcome any challenge if we're together." His voice was filled with confidence. The Tin Man nodded in agreement. "We'll help each other and complete this journey," he said. The Lion continued to strive for courage, doing his best for his friends. He was slowly overcoming his fears and finding true bravery. Dorothy and her friends finally arrived at the gates of the Emerald City after following the yellow brick road. The city's walls sparkled like enormous emerald gems, and they glimmered under the sunlight, creating a dazzling sight. Lining the walls were trees with emerald green leaves, and various flowers blossomed between them, creating an enchanting landscape. "We're almost there," the Scarecrow exclaimed with an excited voice. His eyes sparkled as he marveled at the city's beauty. The Tin Man could not contain his amazement either. "This city is truly dazzling," he said. His metallic body reflected the city's light, making him shine even more. The Cowardly Lion still seemed slightly nervous, but Dorothy held his paw and encouraged him. "Don't worry, Lion. We'll all find your courage together," she said gently, comforting the Lion. The Lion, gaining confidence from Dorothy's warm touch, nodded. The city's grand gates opened with a resounding creak. They took their first steps into the mystical Emerald City. The city inside was even more astonishing. The streets were paved with emerald-colored bricks, and all the buildings were adorned with beautiful gems. As they walked along the roads, they saw large and small fountains, with clear, sparkling water flowing from them. Surrounding the fountains were various blooming flowers, and their fragrance subtly filled the air. The people walking through the streets wore splendid clothes, and their faces were bright with smiles. Dorothy and her friends were in awe of such sights. "Wow, it's so beautiful!" Dorothy exclaimed. Her eyes sparkled as she tried to take in every detail of the city. As they made their way to the center of the city, Dorothy and her friends marveled at the various sights of the Emerald City. Tall towers rose as if they were piercing the sky, and their tips were adorned with emerald decorations. The sunlight reflected off these decorations, making the entire city shimmer. Throughout the city were artistic sculptures, crafted so intricately that they appeared almost lifelike. Dorothy walked along the streets with wide eyes, looking around. "Wow, it's so beautiful!" she exclaimed. The people around them warmly welcomed Dorothy and her friends, smiling at them. The city was lively and peaceful. The streets were lined with various shops, each gleaming with an array of jewels and ornaments. The shop owners greeted them kindly, inviting them inside. Dorothy paused in front of a shop, admiring the beautiful jewels on display. "These jewels are incredible," she said in awe. The Tin Man also looked at the jewels with fascination. "I've never seen anything so sparkling," he said. They continued walking toward the city's center. In the central square was a massive emerald fountain, with water jets shooting high into the air and casting a beautiful glow. Surrounding the fountain were a multitude of flowers in full bloom, and their scent subtly filled the city. In the middle of the square stood a tall and grand tower, which seemed to be a significant landmark in the city. "Look, that tall tower is glowing. The wizard must be there," the Scarecrow pointed out. His voice was filled with excitement and anticipation. Dorothy and her friends headed toward the tower. They were awestruck by its size and beauty. The tower was adorned with emeralds and gold, and its light illuminated the surroundings. In front of the tower's door stood 2 guards, who greeted Dorothy and her friends kindly. "Welcome to the Emerald City of Oz," one of the guards said in greeting. Dorothy and her friends, following the guard's guidance, entered the tower. The inside of the tower was even more astonishing. The high ceiling was intricately decorated, and the walls were adorned with emeralds and gold. All around, large and small gems glowed, casting a gentle light throughout the tower. The floor was made of polished marble, which made a soft sound with each step. "Wow, it's amazing!" Dorothy exclaimed. Her eyes were captivated by the tower's beauty. Toto sniffed around, exploring their surroundings. "There, light is coming from that tall tower. The wizard must be there," the Scarecrow pointed out, his voice filled with anticipation and excitement. In the center of the tower was a grand spiral staircase. The handrail was decorated with gold, and small emerald carvings were attached to it. Dorothy and her friends, guided by the guards, carefully climbed the stairs. With each step, a soft light shone from beneath their feet, making them feel as if they were walking in a dream. As they ascended the stairs, Dorothy carefully observed the patterns etched on the walls. The patterns were filled with magical symbols, containing the history and legends of Oz. The Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion were also fascinated by the designs. "This place is truly mysterious and beautiful," the Tin Man remarked, his voice full of admiration. "Do you think we will be able to meet the wizard?" the Lion asked nervously. Dorothy smiled and comforted the Lion. "Don't worry, Lion. Since we've come this far, I'm sure we'll meet the wizard." They continued climbing the stairs. The higher they went, the stronger the light became, and they could feel a mysterious energy emanating from the top of the tower. Finally, they arrived at a large door. The door was decorated with gold and emeralds, with intricate patterns and letters etched into its surface. "This must be the wizard's room," the Scarecrow said, his voice trembling with anticipation and excitement. Dorothy carefully knocked on the door. "Knock, knock, knock," she said in a nervous voice. After a moment, the door slowly opened with a creaking sound. Encouraging each other, they stepped inside. As the door opened, Dorothy and her friends entered a room illuminated by a mysterious green light. The room was spacious and high, with a massive emerald throne in the center. The throne glowed brilliantly, surrounded by beautiful patterns. The walls were adorned with large and small emeralds that illuminated the room. Hanging from the ceiling was a golden chandelier, its soft light warmly enveloping the entire room. The air in the room felt mysterious and sacred. Dorothy and her friends quietly walked around, taking in their surroundings. The floor was made of smooth marble, and it was covered with a luxurious carpet. The carpet was intricately decorated, seemingly telling the history of Oz. "This place truly feels like a magical world," the Tin Man said in awe, his eyes sparkling with admiration. "Oh, it's a bit scary here, but I must be brave," the Lion muttered. His voice still carried some fear, but he mustered the courage to move forward. Dorothy smiled at her friends and encouraged them. "We can do it. Once we meet the wizard, our wishes will come true." They approached the emerald throne. The throne seemed to recognize their presence, glowing even brighter. Beside the throne was a large, thick book that appeared to hold secrets related to magic. The cover of the book was adorned with gold, with mystical patterns and letters etched into it. "Wow, this is amazing," the Scarecrow said, his voice filled with reverence. They knelt before the throne, waiting for the wizard to appear. The room was silent, but within that silence, they could feel a mystical energy. Dorothy looked around nervously, fervently hoping for the wizard to appear. Dorothy and her friends encouraged each other as they prepared to meet the wizard. The air in the room was filled with a serene yet mysterious atmosphere. Dorothy, standing with her friends before the throne, reflected on the journey they had taken to reach this point. Deep within her, she felt a surge of tension and excitement. "We can do this," Dorothy said confidently. Her voice was filled with assurance, and her friends felt inspired by her words. Dorothy held Toto tightly in one hand and grasped the Scarecrow's hand with the other. The Scarecrow's straw hand was soft and warm. The Tin Man checked his body and said, "I am ready to receive my heart." He carefully moved his arms and legs, satisfied that they no longer creaked and moved smoothly. A contented smile spread across his face. The Scarecrow placed a hand on his head and said, "I want to gain wisdom. The wizard will give me wise thoughts." His eyes sparkled with hope and anticipation. The lion took a deep breath and said, "I need courage. I want to overcome my fears and become a true lion." His voice still carried a hint of fear, but he moved forward with determination. They looked at each other and smiled. Dorothy held her friends' hands tightly, feeling their warmth. "We can do anything if we are together," she said once more. At that moment, the light in the room intensified. The light spread out from the throne, illuminating the entire room. Dorothy and her friends watched the light, eagerly awaiting the wizard's appearance. The room remained silent, but within that silence, they could feel a powerful energy. Dorothy looked around nervously, fervently hoping for the wizard to appear. Suddenly, a brilliant light filled the room, and the wizard appeared. His presence was grand and mysterious. He wore a long robe that sparkled with emerald light. The robe was intricately embroidered with gold thread, adorned with gems of various sizes, making it even more splendid and dazzling. The wizard's face was obscured by a faint light, but his eyes were full of wisdom and power. His eyes shone with a deep and mysterious light as he gazed intently at Dorothy and her friends. Dorothy and her friends were momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by the wizard's majesty. The room was silent, and the wizard's mere presence captivated their hearts. The wizard slowly sat on the throne to welcome them. His voice was low and gentle, yet it echoed throughout the room, leaving a profound impression on their hearts. "Why have you come here?" the wizard asked. His voice sounded mystical, like an echo from afar. Dorothy bravely stepped forward. "We have come to fulfill our wishes. I want to return home. The Scarecrow wants wisdom, the Tin Man wants a heart, and the lion wants courage," she said firmly. Her voice was filled with confidence and earnestness. The wizard was silent for a moment. His eyes carefully examined Dorothy and her friends. He seemed to be reading their sincerity and earnestness. Before I grant your wishes, there is something I need you to do for me," the wizard said slowly. Dorothy and her friends looked at each other nervously. "What do we need to do?" the Scarecrow asked. His voice trembled, but he mustered the courage to wait for the wizard's answer. "You must defeat the Wicked Witch of the West. Defeat her and return, and I will grant your wishes," the wizard said. His voice was firm and resolute. The room was filled with tension. Dorothy and her friends looked at each other and resolved to do it. "We can do it together," Dorothy declared courageously. Her words gave strength to her friends, and they decided to accept the wizard's challenge. "All right, wizard. We will defeat the Wicked Witch of the West and return," Dorothy said with determination. Her eyes were filled with a burning resolve. As the door slowly opened, a brilliant light spread throughout the room, and the wizard's figure gradually appeared within it. The wizard was wearing a long robe that shimmered with an emerald glow. The edges of the robe were intricately embroidered with gold thread, and a large emerald pendant around his neck sparkled with light. Though his face was obscured by a faint glow, his eyes were full of wisdom and power, casting a deep and mysterious light as he carefully observed Dorothy and her friends. The air in the room felt heavy and reverent, simply because of the wizard's presence. Dorothy and her friends were momentarily speechless, overwhelmed by his majesty. The wizard slowly sat on his throne and greeted them. His voice was low and gentle, yet it reverberated throughout the room, leaving a profound impression on their hearts. "Why have you come here?" the wizard's voice echoed in the room, sounding as if it were a mystical echo from afar. Dorothy gathered her courage and stepped forward. With a mix of fear and excitement, she began to speak. "We have come because we each have a wish. I want to return home. The Scarecrow seeks wisdom, the Tin Man desires a heart, and the Lion wants courage," she said firmly. Her voice carried both confidence and earnestness. The wizard remained silent for a moment, his eyes carefully examining Dorothy and her friends. He seemed to be reading their sincerity and earnestness. Although the room was quiet, a powerful energy was palpable within the silence. The wizard's eyes glimmered in response to Dorothy's words. Despite the wizard's imposing presence, Dorothy took another step forward with courage. She took a deep breath and slowly began to speak. "I want to return home, to my family in Kansas," Dorothy said. Her voice trembled slightly, but a strong determination was evident within it. She eagerly awaited the wizard's reaction, her eyes wide as she gazed at him. When it was his turn, the Scarecrow leaned forward and said, "I want to gain wisdom. I wish for a brain to think with." His eyes were filled with earnestness. The Scarecrow was delighted to finally express his long-held desire. The Tin Man moved his steel body forward and said, "I need a heart. I need to feel emotions," he said. His voice was soft but firm. The Tin Man had always felt regretful about his inability to feel, making this wish profoundly significant to him. Lastly, the lion stepped forward with courage. He took a deep breath and said in a trembling voice, "I need courage. I want to live without fear." His voice still held a hint of fear, but he spoke with a determined attitude. The wizard listened to their words in silence, his eyes moving from one to the other, gauging their sincerity and earnestness. The room remained quiet, but within that stillness, a powerful energy was present. The wizard's eyes sparkled in response to their words. The wizard slowly began to speak. "Before I grant your wishes, there is something I need you to do for me," he said. His voice was firm and unwavering. The room filled with tension, focusing on the wizard's words. Dorothy and her friends looked at each other nervously, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Scarecrow gathered his courage and asked, "What do we need to do?" His voice trembled, but it carried a tone of determination. Taking a deep breath, the wizard began to explain. "The Wicked Witch of the West is trying to conquer this land. She uses evil and powerful magic to torment many. You must defeat her. If you return after defeating her, I will grant your wishes," the wizard said solemnly. Dorothy and her friends were shocked by his words, and they looked at each other with faces full of fear and worry. However, Dorothy resolved to accept the wizard's condition. She encouraged her friends, saying, "We can do anything if we stick together." The Tin Man nodded in agreement. "That's right. We can overcome any difficulty if we work together." The Scarecrow also reaffirmed his determination. "We'll fulfill the wizard's request and achieve our own wishes." Though the lion still looked fearful, he drew courage from Dorothy's words and said, "If we're all together, we can do it." The wizard nodded, acknowledging their resolve. "Good. I believe in your determination. Defeat the Wicked Witch of the West, and I will grant your wishes," the wizard said solemnly once more. His voice carried a warning about how challenging and dangerous their journey would be. Dorothy and her friends thanked the wizard, determined to begin their journey to defeat the Wicked Witch of the West. Their eyes were filled with determination and hope. Dorothy and her friends left the wizard's tower and began their long journey to defeat the Wicked Witch of the West. The wind howled as they walked along the path, and the trees creaked as if watching them. They walked cautiously, and Dorothy silently prayed that she and her friends would complete this journey safely. The forest grew darker, and branches clashed together, making eerie sounds. The ground was uneven, full of obstacles that hindered their steps. Dorothy kept her eyes wide open, carefully watching the path. Toto remained vigilant beside her, and her friends followed closely. "This place is really scary," the lion murmured in a fearful voice. However, Dorothy comforted him, saying, "Don't worry, lion. If we're together, we can overcome any obstacle." The Tin Man encouraged the lion, saying, "That's right. We'll support each other and finish this journey." Encouraging each other, they moved forward. The forest became deeper and darker, and they encountered increasingly large obstacles. Nevertheless, they supported each other and overcame every difficulty. As they walked along the path, they encountered a significant challenge. A wide and deep river flowed before them, and they had to cross it. Dorothy looked at the river and pondered. "How can we cross this river?" she asked her friends. The Scarecrow thought for a moment before saying, "We can use that tree to build a bridge." His friends agreed with his suggestion. The Tin Man used his steel body to move the tree, and Dorothy and the lion helped him place it across the river. Carefully, they built the bridge and finally crossed the river safely. "We did it!" Dorothy exclaimed joyfully. Her face lit up with a bright smile. Her friends shared in her joy and encouraged each other. After crossing the river, Dorothy and her friends continued walking westward. The path became increasingly rugged, and the surrounding landscape grew more peculiar and mysterious. The forest became denser, the trees taller, and the leaves darker and shinier. Colorful birds flew between the leaves, singing their own songs. Sometimes, the songs were beautiful, other times, they were eerie. "This place is truly mysterious and frightening," the lion murmured. Understanding his fear, Dorothy stood by his side and held his hand tightly. As they continued along the path, they entered a deeper and darker forest. The wind grew stronger, and the branches clashed together, making eerie sounds. The ground was uneven, full of obstacles that hindered their steps. Dorothy kept her eyes wide open, carefully watching the path. Toto remained vigilant beside her. At one point, they were suddenly blocked by a huge boulder. The boulder was too large to go around or over. Dorothy looked at it and pondered. "How can we get past this boulder?" she asked her friends. The Scarecrow thought for a moment before saying, "Let's climb up the boulder and look around. There must be a way." His friends agreed with his suggestion. The Tin Man used his steel body to help the Scarecrow climb up the boulder. The Scarecrow looked around from the top. "There's a path if we go around that way," the Scarecrow called down. Following his directions, they found a way around the boulder. They continued walking. The forest grew darker, and the path more rugged. However, they encouraged each other and moved forward. Dorothy constantly motivated her friends to not lose courage. "We can overcome any difficulty if we're together," she said. As they walked along the path, they encountered various challenges. The ground became more rugged, and the surrounding landscape grew even more peculiar. Nevertheless, they supported each other and overcame every difficulty. Their friendship grew deeper, and they relied on each other as they moved forward. During their journey westward, Dorothy and her friends had to pass through a deep and dark forest. This forest was filled with challenges and obstacles they had never faced before. The trees grew so tall that they seemed to pierce the sky, and their branches intertwined to form a complex maze before them. The leaves were dark and shiny, and only a faint light filtered through, casting an eerie glow in the forest. As they walked through the forest, they encountered various creatures. Most of these creatures watched them cautiously, but some approached with curiosity. Dorothy remained vigilant yet greeted them warmly. "We are on our way to meet the Wizard of Oz. We're going to defeat the Wicked Witch of the West," Dorothy explained. The lion, taking a deep breath to overcome his fear, said, "This forest is really scary. But we can overcome it if we're together." His voice still trembled, but it carried a tone of determination. The Tin Man used his steel body to clear branches and make a path. "We'll make it through as long as we help each other," he said confidently. His arms creaked with every movement, but the sound was now familiar to them, like a comforting melody. The Scarecrow climbed a tall tree to scout for a path. Holding onto the branches for balance, he said, "There's a way through over there." His voice was filled with hope and confidence. Encouraging one another, they moved forward. Dorothy led the way to give her friends strength, and Toto stayed vigilant by her side, watching their surroundings. "We can overcome any difficulty if we stick together," Dorothy shouted energetically. Deep in the forest, they suddenly encountered a wide, swift river. The water was clear and blue, but the current was very strong. Dorothy pondered how they could cross the river. "How can we get across this river?" she asked her friends. The Scarecrow thought for a moment before saying, "We can use those trees to build a bridge." His friends agreed with his suggestion. The Tin Man started moving the trees with his steel body. Dorothy and the lion helped him place the trees across the river. They carefully built the bridge and finally crossed the river safely. "We did it!" Dorothy exclaimed joyfully. Her face was lit up with a bright smile. Her friends shared in her joy, encouraging each other. After crossing the river, they continued westward. The path became more challenging, and the landscape grew increasingly strange and mystical. They finally reached the Wicked Witch's castle. The castle was built of massive black stones, shrouded in thick mist. Dense thorn bushes and brambles grew around it, making it very difficult to approach. The castle exuded an intimidating atmosphere. The black stone walls seemed to bear the marks of time, with rusted metal designs etched into them. The tall towers of the castle soared into the sky, with the witches' flags fluttering at their peaks. The flags bore the witches' symbol, a black cat and a snake. "That's the Wicked Witch's castle," Dorothy said. Her voice was filled with determination, but also tinged with fear. "Can we do this?" the lion asked cautiously, his voice still laced with fear. The Tin Man shook his steel arm resolutely. "Of course, we can. As long as we're together, we can overcome any challenge." The Scarecrow looked up at the tall towers and nodded. "We've overcome so many obstacles already. We can do this too." They stood before the enormous castle doors. The doors were made of massive metal, adorned with intricate patterns and letters. Dorothy took a deep breath to overcome her fear and knocked on the door carefully. The door slowly creaked open, and they stepped into the mysterious and dark castle. Dorothy and her friends knocked on the enormous castle door. It creaked open slowly, and they entered the mysterious and dark castle. The interior of the castle was cold and ominous. The walls were made of enormous stones, with flickering candles providing dim light along the corridors. The walls were adorned with eerie paintings and magical symbols. As they ventured deeper into the castle, Dorothy and her friends grew increasingly tense. They encouraged each other with glances of reassurance. Toto walked quietly beside Dorothy, ever vigilant. The Scarecrow trembled with anxiety, while the Tin Man moved his steel body cautiously, watching their surroundings. The lion still felt fear, but led the way to protect his friends. When they reached the heart of the castle, they came upon a grand hall. The door to the hall was black and heavy, with intricate magical symbols engraved on its surface. Dorothy took a deep breath and carefully opened the door. They stepped into the grand hall of the witch. In the center of the hall stood the Wicked Witch of the West. She wore a black robe, and her eyes glowed sharply and coldly. The witch burst into a sharp, mocking laugh as she saw Dorothy and her friends. "Have you come to defeat me?" Her voice was cold and mocking. Despite her fear, Dorothy mustered the courage to step forward. "Yes, we're here by the Wizard of Oz's command. We're here to defeat you and achieve our wishes," she said firmly. The witch laughed derisively at their resolve. "You think you can defeat me? Try if you dare," she said, stretching out her hand. Instantly, powerful magical light emanated from her hand. As the witch's cold laughter echoed through the hall, Dorothy and her friends exchanged determined looks. Dorothy was resolved to overcome her fear of the witch's menacing presence. She took a deep breath and courageously stepped forward. "We've decided to defeat you," Dorothy declared firmly. Her voice was strong and unwavering. "We're not afraid of your magic if we're together." The lion spoke with a trembling voice. "Yes, we can do anything if we're together." His voice still held traces of fear, but he was determined to protect his friends. The Tin Man moved his steel body and said, "We've come this far by helping each other. We'll fight together and win." The Scarecrow clenched his straw hands and said, "The wizard will help us. We can do this." The witch laughed at their resolve and stretched out her hand. "You really think you can defeat me? Give it a try." Powerful magical light emanated from her hand. It was strong and threatening, but Dorothy and her friends did not back down. Dorothy began to devise a strategy with her friends. "We all need to play our parts. Lion, distract the witch. Tin Man, use your steel body to block her magic. Scarecrow, use your wisdom to find her weakness. I'll do my best to protect us." Her friends nodded at her words and steeled themselves for the battle. They held each other's hands tightly and gathered their strength to defeat the witch. Dorothy summoned courage from deep within and faced the witch with burning determination in her eyes. The battle with the witch began. Dorothy and her friends were resolved to face the witch's attacks. The lion let out a powerful roar and charged at the witch. His massive body moved with strength, and his sharp claws gleamed as he threatened the witch. The witch waved her hand, casting powerful magic to fend off the lion, but he fought persistently, overcoming his fear. The Tin Man used his steel body to block the witch's magic. Whenever she stretched out her hand to cast a magical light, the Tin Man deflected it with his steel arms. His body could withstand the magical force, and he stood firm, protecting his friends. "We can do anything if we're together," the Tin Man shouted energetically. The Scarecrow darted around, distracting the witch. He kept moving constantly, creating confusion and preventing her from focusing. "The wizard will help us," the Scarecrow shouted confidently. His wisdom and agility greatly disrupted the witch's plans. While her friends battled the witch, Dorothy focused on finding the witch's weakness. She observed the patterns of the witch's magic, trying to discover a flaw. Her eyes were filled with burning determination. "We can do this," Dorothy mentally encouraged herself. At that moment, Dorothy realized the witch's weakness. The witch was vulnerable to water. Dorothy quickly informed her friends. "The witch is weak against water. We can defeat her with water," she shouted. The lion heard Dorothy's words and spotted a water barrel nearby. He used his strong claws to lift the barrel and threw it at the witch. The Tin Man and the Scarecrow also used water to attack the witch. The witch screamed and tried to avoid the water, but it was too late. Her body started to melt as soon as the water touched her. After defeating the witch, Dorothy and her friends set out to return to the Wizard of Oz, filled with the joy of victory. Their steps were lighter, and their hearts were full of hope and accomplishment. Dorothy held her hands tightly, proud of what they had achieved as they walked along the path. The journey was still challenging, but now they moved forward without fear. The forest remained dark, but their spirits shone brightly. Dorothy and her friends encouraged each other, realizing how much stronger they had become. The lion no longer trembled with fear, the Tin Man felt stronger in his steel body, and the Scarecrow found he could solve more problems with his newfound wisdom. "We really did it!" Dorothy exclaimed with joy. A bright smile spread across her face. Her friends shared in her happiness and encouraged each other. "We can overcome any difficulty if we stick together," the lion said confidently. His eyes were now filled with courage instead of fear. "That's right. We've helped each other to get this far. Now it's time to go back to the wizard and fulfill our wishes," the Tin Man said resolutely. "The wizard will be waiting for us." "We will achieve our wishes," the Scarecrow agreed, nodding. They walked along the path towards the Emerald City of Oz. The city welcomed them warmly, and they headed to the wizard's tower. The huge doors of the tower opened before them, and they went inside to meet the wizard. The wizard greeted Dorothy and her friends warmly upon their return. His face was filled with amazement and joy. "Incredible! You really defeated the Wicked Witch of the West," the wizard exclaimed, praising them. His voice was full of genuine admiration. Dorothy and her friends proudly recounted their adventure to the wizard, explaining how they had worked together to defeat the witch and how each of them had played a crucial role. The wizard listened intently, deeply impressed by their story. "You are truly brave and determined," the wizard said with a smile. "Having seen your courage and determination, I am now ready to grant your wishes." Dorothy and her friends looked at each other, beaming with joy. They were filled with hope, knowing their wishes would finally come true. "Dorothy, you and your friends have accomplished something remarkable. I'm ready to grant each of your wishes," the wizard said in a serious tone. His eyes shone warmly and kindly. Dorothy expressed her deep gratitude upon hearing the wizard's words. She realized once again how important their journey and the friendship with her companions were. Dorothy and her friends approached the wizard together. "Thank you, wizard. We are truly happy," she said earnestly. While Dorothy and her friends were waiting for the wizard's approval, a small incident occurred. Toto, running around the room, accidentally pulled back a curtain. Behind the curtain stood an ordinary man at a control panel. The man turned around, startled by Dorothy and her friends' gazes. "Aha! So you are the real Wizard of Oz," Dorothy exclaimed in surprise. Her eyes were wide with shock and curiosity. The man awkwardly smiled and nodded. "Yes, I'm just an ordinary person. But I can still help you," he confessed honestly. His voice was warm and sincere. Dorothy and her friends were initially shocked, but soon felt reassured by the man's sincerity. The Scarecrow nodded and said, "Even so, you can still help us, right?" The man replied with a confident voice, "Of course. Although I don't possess magical powers, I have the wisdom and skills needed to fulfill your wishes." His eyes shone with genuine warmth and determination. Dorothy and her friends stood before the wizard. Recognizing their hard work, the wizard was ready to grant each of their wishes. The Scarecrow stepped forward first, his eyes sparkling with expectation and hope. "I want a head full of wisdom," the Scarecrow said. His voice was filled with earnestness. Throughout their journey, he had always longed for wisdom, despite the many challenges he faced. After hearing the Scarecrow's request, the wizard thought for a moment. He approached the Scarecrow and placed his hand on his head. "Wisdom is not just about knowing many things, but about how you use that knowledge," the wizard said seriously. Then, the wizard handed the Scarecrow a small box. Inside the box was a beautiful golden book. "This is the Book of Wisdom. It contains many wise thoughts and lessons. You will learn a lot from this book and gain true wisdom," the wizard explained. The Scarecrow held the book in his hands and felt deeply moved. Tears of gratitude filled his eyes. "Thank you so much, wizard. I will learn a lot from this book," he said with heartfelt emotion. Dorothy and her friends rejoiced at the Scarecrow's transformation. They encouraged each other and gained the courage to move forward. After the Scarecrow received the Book of Wisdom, the Tin Man stepped forward. His steel body glistened in the light, and his eyes were filled with expectation and earnestness. "I need a heart. I want to feel emotions," the Tin Man said. His voice carried a deep longing. The wizard thought for a moment and then approached the Tin Man, placing his hand on his chest. A heart is not just about feeling emotions, but about connecting with others through those emotions, the wizard gently explained. He then took out a small box and handed it to the Tin Man. Inside the box was a beautiful red heart that seemed to beat slowly, almost as if it were alive. "This is a true heart. It will allow you to feel emotions and experience love and compassion," the wizard said. The Tin Man carefully took the heart from the box and placed it in his chest. At that moment, he felt a warm sensation spreading throughout his body. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank you so much, wizard. I can now truly feel emotions," he said, overcome with emotion. Dorothy, the Scarecrow, and the lion watched the Tin Man's transformation with joy. They hugged each other in celebration. For the first time, the Tin Man felt genuine joy and emotion, and tears of gratitude flowed from his eyes. Next, the lion stepped forward. He still felt a bit of fear, but seeing his friend's transformations gave him courage. "I need courage. I want to live without fear," the lion said. His voice was filled with hope and earnestness. The wizard nodded, understanding the lion's request. He looked into the lion's eyes and spoke seriously. "Courage is not just the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it," the wizard said. He then took out a small vial and handed it to the lion. The vial contained a golden liquid. "This is a potion of courage. When you drink it, you will gain true courage. But remember, real courage comes from within, not just from this potion," the wizard explained with a warm smile. The lion carefully accepted the vial and took a sip of the potion. As the potion spread through his body, the lion felt a warm energy enveloping him. Deep within his chest, fear began to fade, replaced by strong confidence and determination. "Thank you so much, wizard. I now feel true courage," the lion said, moved by the experience. His voice no longer trembled, and his eyes were filled with a strong light. Dorothy and her friends rejoiced at the lion's transformation. They encouraged and celebrated each other. The lion was now ready to protect his friends with his newfound courage. After the lion drank the potion and gained true courage, Dorothy stepped forward. Deep in her heart, she had a fervent desire to return home. The thought that she and her friends had finally stood before the wizard and could have their wishes granted filled her heart with joy. "I want to go home to my family in Kansas," Dorothy said. Her voice trembled, but it was filled with strong determination and earnestness. Her eyes were full of longing for home and love for her family. The wizard listened to Dorothy's request and fell into deep thought. He looked at Dorothy and spoke. "Dorothy, you have learned so much on this journey and shown great courage and determination. Now, we must find a way to send you home." The wizard approached Dorothy and took her hand. "Returning home is not easy, but with your earnest heart and the help of your friends, it is possible," he said with a warm smile. The wizard handed Dorothy a small silver orb. It glowed warmly in her hand. "This orb will take you home. But you need your wish and the strength of your friends. Hold the orb and think deeply about your wish," the wizard explained. Dorothy held the orb tightly, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She thought of her home and family in Kansas, wishing deeply from the bottom of her heart. Her friends gathered around her, supporting her. The Scarecrow held his book of wisdom, the Tin Man felt his new heart, and the Lion, with his newfound courage, all lent their strength to Dorothy. Dorothy held the silver orb given to her by the wizard and wished deeply, thinking of her home and family in Kansas. Her heart was full of longing for her home and love for her family. Her friends gathered around her, giving her strength and support. At that moment, Toto approached Dorothy. Toto rubbed his face against Dorothy's leg, encouraging her. Dorothy felt Toto's warmth and gained even more courage. She was overwhelmed with hope, knowing she could return home with Toto. Dorothy closed her eyes and squeezed the orb tightly, thinking of all the memories with Toto. Toto had always been by Dorothy's side, protecting her and enduring many hardships together. Dorothy realized once again how much comfort and courage Toto had given her. Resolving to return home with Toto, she wished deeply from the bottom of her heart. "Toto, we'll get home," Dorothy whispered softly. Her voice was warm and full of conviction. Toto wagged his tail, seeming to understand her words and giving her encouragement. At that moment, the silver orb in Dorothy's hand began to glow brightly. The light from the orb grew stronger, enveloping Dorothy and Toto. Dorothy closed her eyes and felt the light, filled with confidence that her wish would come true. As the light enveloping Dorothy and Toto grew stronger, Dorothy felt ready to return home. She thanked her friends, realizing how precious the journey and her friendships were. "Thank you, everyone. I couldn't have made it this far without you," Dorothy said, tears streaming down her face. The Scarecrow held Dorothy's hand tightly and said, "Dorothy, you'll always be our friend. We'll never forget your courage and determination." His voice was filled with deep emotion. The Tin Man gently hugged Dorothy with his steel arms and said, "You'll always remain in our hearts. We'll always remember you." The Lion, with tears in his eyes, said, "Dorothy, you gave me courage. I'll always live remembering your bravery." Dorothy was deeply moved by her friend's words. She held the orb tightly, closed her eyes, and remembered the wizard's words. "You must think deeply about your wish through the orb." The wizard's words echoed in her mind as she wished deeply, longing for home. Dorothy's heart was filled with memories of her home and family in Kansas. She recalled the warm sunlit plains and the happy moments she spent there. Dorothy took a deep breath and focused on the orb. The light from the orb grew stronger, enveloping Dorothy and Toto. The light felt like a warm embrace. At that moment, Dorothy felt herself becoming lighter and lifting off the ground. Though her eyes were closed, she felt everything around her bathed in bright light. The energy from the light enveloped her body and mind, giving her the certainty that she was ready to return home. As Dorothy and her friends exchanged emotional farewells, the wizard looked at the lights surrounding Dorothy and Toto and spoke in a voice full of confidence. "Dorothy, you are now ready to return home. Your wish and the strength of your friends will take you there." His voice was warm and reassuring, providing great comfort to Dorothy. Stepping closer to Dorothy, the wizard said, "Dorothy, you have learned so much on this journey. Your courage, determination, and friendship have brought you this far. Now, you can return to the place you have longed for." Dorothy felt immense gratitude as she listened to the wizard. With tears in her eyes, she said, "Thank you so much, wizard. Thank you, everyone. I will never forget you." The wizard smiled and placed his hand on Dorothy's shoulder. "Dorothy, you have come this far thanks to your courage and the help of your friends. Now, you will return home to fulfill your wish. Remember the lessons you've learned and keep them in your heart." Dorothy nodded, looking at her friends with eyes full of gratitude and love. They smiled back at her, offering strength in their final moments together. "We will always remember you, Dorothy," the Scarecrow said, his eyes filled with deep emotion. "We will always cherish your warm heart," the Tin Man said, his voice brimming with sincere emotion. "You gave me courage. I will always live remembering your bravery," the Lion said. His voice no longer trembled, and it was filled with strong determination. Dorothy slowly approached her friends to say her final goodbyes, tears of emotion welling up in her eyes. Her friends warmly welcomed her, expressing their admiration for her determination and courage. The Scarecrow held Dorothy's hand tightly and looked deeply into her eyes. "Dorothy, you will always be our friend. Through your courage and wisdom, we have learned so much. You are our hero. We will always remember you," he said warmly and sincerely. Dorothy squeezed his hand and smiled. The Tin Man gently hugged Dorothy and said, "I will always cherish your warm heart and love. You taught me the true value of emotions," he said, his voice filled with deep emotion. Dorothy wept in his embrace, expressing her gratitude. The Lion approached Dorothy, tears in his eyes, and said, "Dorothy, you gave me courage. I will always remember your bravery. You are a true friend to me," he said. His voice no longer trembled, and it was filled with strong determination. Dorothy praised the Lion's courage and gently patted his head. The wizard watched this scene with a smile. "You are all truly wonderful friends. Dorothy, you have learned much on this journey. Now you will return home to fulfill your wish. Do not forget the lessons you have learned and always keep them in your heart," the wizard said, offering his final words of encouragement to Dorothy. Dorothy nodded, looking at her friends one more time with eyes full of gratitude and love. "Thank you so much, everyone. I will always remember you," she said, tears streaming down her face. She promised to cherish every moment she had shared with her friends. Dorothy was deeply moved as she said her final goodbyes to her friends. Her heart was filled with memories of all the moments they had shared. Dorothy expressed her gratitude to her friends, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you so much, everyone. I will never forget you," she said, her voice full of emotion. The Scarecrow held Dorothy's hand tightly and looked deeply into her eyes. "Dorothy, you will always be our friend. Through your courage and wisdom, we have learned so much. You are our hero. We will always remember you," he said warmly and sincerely. Dorothy squeezed his hand and smiled. The Tin Man gently hugged Dorothy and said, "I will always cherish your warm heart and love. You taught me the true value of emotions," he said, his voice filled with deep emotion. Dorothy wept in his embrace, expressing her gratitude. The lion approached Dorothy, tears in his eyes, and said, "Dorothy, you gave me courage. I will always remember your bravery. You are a true friend to me," he said. His voice no longer trembled, and it was filled with strong determination. Dorothy praised the lion's courage and gently patted his head. The wizard watched this scene with a smile. "You are all truly wonderful friends. Dorothy, you have learned much on this journey. Now you will return home to fulfill your wish. Do not forget the lessons you have learned and always keep them in your heart," the wizard said, offering his final words of encouragement to Dorothy. Dorothy nodded, looking at her friends one more time with eyes full of gratitude and love. "Thank you so much, everyone. I will always remember you," she said, tears streaming down her face. She promised to cherish every moment she had shared with her friends. Following the wizard's instructions, Dorothy held the silver orb tightly in her hand, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She wished deeply, thinking of her home. "I want to go back to Kansas. I want to return to my family," she prayed earnestly. While Dorothy focused on the orb, the wizard began to cast a protective spell around her. His voice was low and gentle, but resonated throughout the room, raising powerful energy. Dorothy, with her eyes closed, listened to the wizard's spell, feeling the growing energy within her. "Dorothy, focus your heart and wish deeply," the wizard whispered softly. His voice provided great comfort and confidence to Dorothy. She closed her eyes and squeezed the orb tighter. Her heart was full of longing for her home and family in Kansas. As the wizard's spell grew stronger, a glowing energy began to gather around Dorothy. The energy was warm and comforting, enveloping her. Dorothy felt herself becoming lighter, as if she were being lifted into the light. She felt certain that the wizard's spell and her wish were coming together to take her home. The orb began to glow brightly, its light growing stronger as it enveloped Dorothy and Toto. The light felt like a warm embrace. Dorothy closed her eyes and felt the light, filled with confidence that her wish would come true. At that moment, Dorothy felt her body lift off the ground. Though her eyes were closed, she felt everything around her bathed in bright light. The energy of the light surrounded her body and mind, giving her the certainty that she was ready to return home. As the light surrounding Dorothy and Toto grew stronger, they felt as if they were being drawn into a whirlwind. Dorothy closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the light throughout her body, knowing her wish was coming true. Energy swirled around them, forming a powerful vortex. The whirlwind enveloped Dorothy and Toto, lifting them high into the sky. Dorothy felt herself becoming lighter and floating upward. She felt a mix of fear and excitement, spinning rapidly at the center of the whirlwind. Light and energy surrounded her, and she felt the magic's power. In the whirlwind, Dorothy recalled all the moments she shared with her friends. She remembered her journey with the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion, sending them gratitude. "Thank you, everyone. I will always remember you," Dorothy whispered in her heart. Dorothy felt herself rising higher in the whirlwind, energy swirling powerfully around her. That energy was preparing to take her back to Kansas. Dorothy closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, confident her wish was about to come true. At that moment, the whirlwind spun more intensely, quickly transporting Dorothy and Toto. They felt as if they were transcending time and space. Light and energy surrounded them as the whirlwind's power carried them back to Kansas. Dorothy, with her eyes closed, felt herself returning home at the whirlwind's center. She thought of her family's faces, eagerly awaiting their reunion. "I want to go back to Kansas. I want to return to my family," Dorothy earnestly wished again. As the whirlwind began to subside, Dorothy felt herself gently descending to the ground. The light and energy that had surrounded her began to fade, and she slowly returned to reality. Dorothy opened her eyes and looked around. As the scenery became clearer, Dorothy realized that she was back on the vast plains of Kansas. She had finally returned home. The blue sky and warm sunlight welcomed her. Everything was as it had been before she left, and she deeply inhaled the familiar scent of her homeland. Dorothy knelt on the ground, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "I'm finally home. Thank you so much," she whispered. Toto, by her side, wagged his tail excitedly, welcoming her back. Dorothy hugged Toto, sharing in the joy. Slowly, Dorothy stood up and looked around. She began to walk towards her house, taking in every detail of her beloved home. In the distance, she could see her house. It was just as she had left it, and the thought of her family waiting for her filled her with excitement. As Dorothy walked along the path towards her house, she took in the familiar scenery. She cherished every sight of her homeland. The trees lining the path, the small creek running through the field, and the distant windmill, all of it was familiar and beloved. Dorothy recalled memories of playing in the fields with her parents and running around with Toto as a child. She smiled at the happy memories, quickening her pace with anticipation of reuniting with her family. The closer she got to her house, the more Dorothy's heart swelled with excitement. She realized that she was surrounded by the familiar landscape of her home. Flowers bloomed along the roadside, and bees busily gathered pollen. Dorothy felt warmly welcomed by the scenery. As the farm drew closer, Dorothy imagined the moment she would see her family again. Tears of emotion welled up in her eyes. "Toto, we're finally home," Dorothy said to Toto, hugging him tightly. Toto wagged his tail joyfully in response. Dorothy continued walking along the path, taking in the familiar sights. She felt the cool breeze blowing from the fields, taking a deep breath. The breeze gently lifted her hair, and Dorothy enjoyed the natural scent carried by the wind. In the distance, the farm came into view. Dorothy felt a surge of emotion as the house grew clearer. It was just as she had left it, and she felt a deep sense of homecoming. Dorothy held back her urge to run and walked slowly towards her house. Finally, Dorothy arrived in front of the farmhouse. She gazed at the house, filled with deep emotion. "I'm finally home," Dorothy whispered, tears streaming down her face. She stood at the door, taking a moment to catch her breath and calm her emotions. Dorothy slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The house was warm and cozy. She felt her heart swell with joy, thinking of her family waiting for her. She walked towards the room where her family would be, reflecting on her journey. As she opened the door, her family, surprised, welcomed her. "Dorothy," they cried, embracing her with tears of joy. Dorothy sighed in relief, held tightly by her family. "I'm really back, thanks to all of you," she said, tears flowing as she expressed her gratitude. That evening, Dorothy shared a warm meal with her family, recounting her journey. Her family listened, deeply moved, and praised her courage and determination. Dorothy realized again how precious these moments with her family were. As night fell, Dorothy returned to her room and lay on her bed. She smiled as she reflected on her journey. "So much has happened. But now that I'm home, everything will be all right," Dorothy whispered, closing her eyes. She fell into a deep, peaceful sleep with a contented heart.